Okay. Okay. Is this thing on? Yes. Okay. Everything's working. So, hey everybody. Hello, Ember Fest. It's really good. Yes, I love it. Like, there's just something about this feeling where everybody's in the same room again, and I see so many familiar faces. I've met some really awesome people that I've never met before. I love this. This is my best thing about conferences. For anybody who doesn't know me, I'll do a little bit of an introduction. Who am I? My name is Chris Manson. I have 2 dogs, 2 kids, and somehow I find the time to work on open source stuff. One of the ways that I find that time is I work for an awesome company that gives me 20% time to work on community projects, and that is Main Matter. And as Marco mentioned yesterday, Main Matter, it's not a surprise I haven't changed companies or anything. It is the company that has changed, not me. So what was once Simp Labs is now Main Matter. Hopefully I've updated all my socials like I was supposed to do on Monday. So if anybody notices anything that I haven't updated, let me know. Speaking of socials, you can always tweet at me at Real8 anytime about the stuff that I'm talking about today or any stuff around Ember. I am very passionate about this stuff, so I will definitely respond and maybe get into arguments if it's talking about TypeScript or other things. It's fine. So today I am talking about a thing called Bottled Ember, which was a little side project that I mentioned last year at Ember Fest. Look at me there. I look so well rested and young. But last year, the idea was that it might be useful to have all of Ember as a single dependency that could be used in my Empress repos so that you could just have Markdown and one single dependency and not be kind of like surrounded by an Ember app that had all these random files in it. So, phenomenal application power, itty bitty living space. As you can see, I've been working on this experiment for the last 12 months, and I had it finished months ago and released to the world to use so everybody could make use of it. Actually, hold on. There's something odd about this tweet. Let me just zoom in a little bit. Oh, enhance. Oh, yes. Okay. That wasn't months ago. That was last Saturday at midnight when I actually released this thing for the first time. Okay, so I thought this was going to be easier than it was. I'm not necessarily going to go into some of the depths of why it was so hard to get it to where it is now. If anybody is interested in that stuff, I am going to be ready to talk about that after a few beers at the dinner tonight. I need a few beers to talk about some of the things that I've seen. But why should I care? This is a bottled Ember thing for Empress apps. You might be thinking, I'm not using Empress yet. You should do. But you're not using Empress right now. So why does this apply to me? Well, thinking about it, I was thinking how I could use this bottled Ember trick and how it might be useful to test your V2 add-ons. Okay? So I hear people thinking, what's a V2 add-on? I'm going to have to go into a bit of an intro before I can show you why bottled Ember is kind of useful for that. But I also have to go a little bit further back than V2 add-ons. I have to bring you back to a time long ago and talk a little bit about what classic add-ons are and see what the differences are. So I was a little bit torn about how deep of an explanation I should go into this of what is an Ember add-on, because like on one side, in reality, pretty much everybody in this room is probably using a whole ton of Ember add-ons. And probably anybody who's watching the video afterwards as well. And I know we have a lot of add-on authors in here already. So for the sake of completeness and to kind of give people a baseline on how to think about add-ons, I'm going to go into a few of the basics. So what is an add-on? An Ember add-on is just like a special NPM package that automatically integrates with your Ember app. It can either provide some stuff like components, like Ember Paper is good for those sorts of components. There's also an Ember Polaris, which I didn't know about, and Ember Style Guide, which we use on the Ember Learning Team to build our websites. There's also other things that Ember add-ons can provide, like helpers. There's the very popular Ember Truth Helpers add-on, which I'd imagine most Ember developers have come across. But basically, an add-on can provide to you anything that you might write in your own app, and we can share them between each other. Then there's another class of add-on, which is like a do stuff add-on. It might seem like a pretty wide category, but it's kind of like the truth at the moment, and this is the crux of the difference between the old and the new. Like, if you can imagine that an add-on would do something, you can make it do that with the current setup. A good example, since I'm a Jamstack kind of guy, one of the things I use quite a lot is Prember, also made by Ed. Ed is here somewhere. It's what Prember does is it runs at the end of your build and it pre-builds like static HTML for all of the roots or the pages in your app, or at least the ones that you've told it about. So yeah, this is a pretty big category. I've given you one example, but there's like hundreds upon hundreds of these on Ember Observer, and you can look at I think there's a build system category on Ember Observer, and you can see lots of examples. There is actually another type of add-on that would provide you with actions or generators or commands and generators, I think they're called. So, you know, as Ember developers, we probably use Ember Serve quite a lot or Ember Build, but those are built-in commands. You can actually have a whole host of commands that are provided by your add-ons. It's not very widely used. This is one of the things that you need to do to make it work, included commands, and there's not that many results, but it's out there, and one of the most popular ones is Ember Deploy from Ember CLI Deploy. So each add-on can also provide a bunch of generators. So if anybody's heard me talk about Empress before, Empress blog gives you a way to generate a post, an author, a page, or a tag, and things like that. And it puts the right files in the right places for you. And generators can also automatically run when you Ember install a add-on. And you know, these are the sorts of things that you can do. And depending on, like, all of these features are essentially have one thing in common. They're magical. And depending on which category of person you are or which camp you fall in, you either think that's good magic or that's bad magic, you know? And I'm personally a big fan of the magic that Ember does and all these cool Ember techniques, all these add-on techniques, and that's why Empress is essentially built upon them. But I understand and agree with a lot of the criticisms that make people fall into this second camp. And the two big problems that I often see people talk about is provider discoverability and build time problems. So for discoverability, here is an actual template from a little side project that I'm building. You can probably see a ton of Ember paper components in there, and there's also some helpers and modifiers and all this sort of stuff. The issue that we have with current templates is that you can't really understand where these things come from. Like, computers might not be able to understand, and humans also can't understand. We can teach the computers, we can get people to install Ember add-ons for or Ember plugins for their IDEs or whatever, but for us humans, like, where does sortable handle come from? That's not in my app, that's in an add-on, or could even be in an add-on that's included by another add-on. We have a few cultural things that we do to help that. So Ember Paper has a prefix of paper on everything. So paper list, guess where that comes from? Ember Paper. So it's useful, but it doesn't work for everything. So that's the provider add-ons, ones that provide us things. Where do they come from? And on the build side of things, because of the way that a classic add-on can essentially hook into any part of your application build, it's not too hard to imagine a situation where one rogue add-on just completely destroys your development environment. I know because I've done that before. I've released an add-on that essentially requests your app 1,000 times every time it tries to reload, so it DDoSes your local machine. Um, I hope that version's not still out there, but um, so what are we going to do about it? We have Ed to the rescue again. And this year, Ed is helping us earn our lightning speed Scouts badge. Um, and, you know, it says there at the bottom, Embroider. Embroider is the talk of the moment. We've heard 2 things about it even today. I don't know all that much about the internals of it, but the summary is it's our next gen build system. It's the successor to the Ember CLI magic of doing things. But it also makes things a bit less magic and less Ember only magic. And this is one of the same themes that we hear coming up over and over again. Part of the problem that we've had in our community in the last while is that we do Ember things for Ember people, and we don't integrate with other tools because there's special ways of importing things or whatever. And Embroider is an attempt to change that. The V2 add-on spec that we're getting to now is dramatically simplifying the complexity of what an Ember add-on can actually do, and it provides this standard pre-built output that you ship to NPM in a format that's just standard for the entire ecosystem. So when you're importing things, it makes sense to NPM in the same way as it does to your Ember app. There is one problem though, and it's kind of hidden in what I'm saying in that last step, pre-built, and it's for provider add-ons. If your add-on is in the do stuff category, not allowed. You are only allowed to provide things in a V2 add-on. It's not impossible for add-ons to continue to do things to your app, but it can't do it automatically. Like, for example, Prember, there's now instructions at the bottom of the Prember README on how to get yourself to make Prember do its thing at the end of your build. So it's not automatic anymore. I'm not the biggest fan of this, but I understand why it's there. I've had some chats with Ed before about how we might be able to fix that. Might come up with some sort of build add-ons thing that has some sort of structured way of integrating, but not in the bad way where you can do anything anywhere at any time. But we'll see. Maybe next year I'll come back and tell everybody about build add-ons. I don't know. We'll see. So let's get back to what a V2 add-on actually can do and stop talking about what it can't. So the structure of the add-on, as I said, is just a standard NPM package. So what that actually looks like is this. This is what NPM sees for a fancy button add-on that provides one component called fancy button. I don't know about you, but that seems quite slim. There's nothing there. This is a bit of a facetious example because this isn't something that people are actually going to use. This is what people pull from NPM. This is the built version of it. If you look at the source necessary to build that, this is the kind of like minimal example of a package that's able to compile to what I just showed you. Again, it's quite slim. There's nothing there. Like, you see some Babel configs, you see some roll-up stuff, you see your source, very important, but there's no dummy app. There's no way to run this. You can't cd into here and do npm start and like actually see what your add-on does. And that's why, again, this is maybe a little bit of a facetious example because this isn't what you get when you generate a new V2 add-on. What you get is this. And that's a lot more files. There's a lot of stuff in there. It's actually quite easy to simplify it, and I'll do the tour of it in a second. But you can see here, as I say in the title, this is using workspaces. So you have to use a monorepo with this version of the V2 blueprint. And anybody who might have giggled there, like they know me, I don't like monorepos. I'll get to that in a minute. But let's just see what we have here, and then we'll go from there. So I've got a better rendering of that same thing. Exactly the same thing, but now you can see where things are categorized. So in the default blueprint, there are two packages. There's the subfolder, in our case, new fancy button, that has the same name as the overall folder that contains all of this. So that's your actual package, and that's the same essentially as I showed you a few slides ago, where like the minimal version that's necessary to build an NPM package that has your component in it. And then we have this other giant circle over there that is it's called test app. And can anybody guess what that is? It's your test app. So for anybody who's familiar with classic add-ons, you can think of your test app there as your dummy app. It's the thing that you would have like an example and you'd exercise things about it. But this is like 1,000 times better for Ember developers or for people who are developing what's actually happening behind the scenes, because classic add-ons had to jump through so many hoops to get your dummy app to work well with the add-on that was actually contained inside. And like that's the sort of thing that most people don't care about. You know, sometimes maybe you might come across some bug that makes your add-on not work, or maybe you're like me, you spend 12 months building a system that tries to hook into that, and then you really care about those hoops that Ember CLI is jumping through. And what actually happens here, if you cd'd into this overall folder and did npm start, it will start two processes. One that builds our new fancy button into a little package, into the thing that I showed you first, and then another that runs our test app that depends on the built output of your new fancy button, which is pretty good. And it's on port 4200, so not everything needs to change, which is great. So we get back to the very important point. I personally not a big fan of all this. I already mentioned that my bottled Ember idea was originally designed to be something to make an Empress app that you didn't have to have a surrounding Ember app to actually make it work. And then I started thinking, actually, maybe I could use that same idea to do V2 add-ons without monorepos. And it's totally possible, and it's possible today. So let's work together with the example, not the very minimal example and not the monorepo example, the one in the middle, and let's turn that into something that uses bottled Ember. So very first thing, it's on NPM, it's deployed now. We're still on pre 1.0, but it works. So you can install it as a dev dependency. And then once you do this, you need to create like a specific start script that tells bottled Ember how to do what you want it to do. The overall idea is that bottled Ember creates that Ember app that needs to host your add-on behind the scenes. Like, you just don't need to worry about how that works, it just works. We'll see how far that actually goes when people start using this thing, but right now that's how it works. So this is the start script that I was telling you about. It's quite simple on this version. There's a more complicated one in a second. It's just bottled Ember serve, very simple, similar to the Ember serve. The only difference here is that you need to give it a slightly different output from what the current V2 add-on spec, the blueprint is giving you, because the dist folder is being used for your compiled NPM package. And if you don't put in this thing, it'll just clobber that. And like the first time it will run, the second time it'll be like, where's my package gone? So I just tell it to put the compiled version somewhere else. And what actually happens when it does that? We can probably turn off all this logging eventually, but I just thought while it's new and fresh, we can actually show people what's happening. It essentially generates it like a little bottled Ember app, but as I said, behind the scenes in a cache for you. It initializes it. It has a way to kind of add dependencies. We'll get to that in a minute. You can do other customizations to the actual app as well, and link things. Again, I'll show you all that in a minute. But if we ran this in the like minimal V2 add-on, you get a running Ember app, and it would look like this. It would be empty because we didn't tell it what to do. We didn't give it any application template to exercise the component that you're building. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to actually give it the right kind of template? Well, we could just try and create what we would normally create, an app templates application HBS, and see what happens. And if you do that, it works. It just works out of the box. The way that this actually works is that it has the default generated Ember app that's behind the scenes, but then it overlays anything that you have in your add-on on top of that. So if you don't need to write something, you don't have to, but if you want to override what the default blueprint gives you, you can just put it in the right place. So putting app templates application HBS puts it where you might expect in your app. So that also means if you think, okay, I want to add things to this bottled Ember app, you could write yourself a little acceptance test. That's very simple, basic test, visits / we have a my fancy button add-on. I should probably have put some assertions that the component itself is being rendered, the little blue button. That's my fancy add-on, by the way. That's the fancy button. And if you put this in here, because we're actually running an Ember app with Ember Serve, we can go to / tests, and we get the extra acceptance test in here. And funnily enough, when I was doing this, it felt almost a little bit more convenient than even having a real Ember app or an Ember add-on, because you don't need to define any of that test boilerplate stuff. You have a tests folder with exactly one file in it that's just a test. So as long as you're not doing anything different from the default blueprint, it will just use that straight from the default blueprint. So that's pretty cool. And this is pretty useful if you have an add-on that you want to provide your own app that exercises it and demos it and documents it. But let's go back to the Empress thing. The thing that I was showing last year about documenting add-ons, field guide. So field guide, just a recap if anybody doesn't know, is a pretty cool project for documenting your add-ons. It's like Markdown only, and it executes any components that are put in Markdown. Pretty cool. I would say that though. And hopefully I'm going to convince most people to kind of move on from Ember CLI add-on docs to field guide, because it's showing its age and it's a little bit hard to use. But we'll see. So again, because all of bottled Ember is just essentially in these new start scripts, we just need to make a new start script for our doc. This one's a little bit more complicated. I'll explain each of the bits and pieces in here. The serve up there is exactly as you'd expect. But we have a few extra things. So I've got a different output path, and this is different than the previous one, because we don't want, if we want to run all three at the same time, you need to have different output paths for the compiled versions. We might be able to automate that, I don't know. Your depth here is interesting. The way that it used to work in classic add-ons is any dev dependencies that you have on your add-on, any add-ons that are in there get like built into the app, the test app that is running when you're running your npm start inside an add-on. I didn't want to do that because now we're thinking about different things. There's like V2 style dev dependencies in our package JSON. And you don't want to put them in your actual dependencies, because anybody who's consuming your add-on will get field guide, default template, fastboot, and Prember, which they're great projects, but we don't want to have them installed every time you're trying to get a single button from an add-on. So this is a way to kind of tell bottled Ember also add these dependencies in this little cached app behind the scenes. Then we have this other thing, cache name docs. Because of the way the cache works behind the scene, like it's building this little Ember app for you. But if you want to have two running at the same time, you need to have them not clash, essentially. So that's just changing the name of the folder that it builds the app in for you. We have another thing here, no overlay, which is the opposite of what I just told you about your application template and your tests kind of overlaying on top of the Ember app. That's just because Field Guide gives you an application template. It does all that for you. So you don't want your one to override Field Guide. And then we have link docs. So this one's interesting because the way that Field Guide works is you just have a docs folder in the root of your add-on. And that's quite cool because it works both in GitHub and also like when you're building it all, it's nice and it's fancy. It works quite well. But your Ember app needs to know about that. And the way that you do that is you can link that docs folder, it does a symlink for you into that cached Ember app, and everything's in the right place. And then the last one, if anybody knows that one, you know that it's quite a small thing. It just tells it to run on a different port, so you can actually run all three of these up together. And you know, people who know me know I like tabs. We have all three tabs. One's the test app, one's the actual Field Guide, and one's the actual tests on the test app. So there's also a trick in the monorepo blueprint, which like if you have lots of start doc, start app, or just like start build or add-on, you can run npm start and it runs them all individually, which is pretty cool. So we can probably steal that as well. And that's pretty much it. That's it for how to use bottled Ember in a V2 add-on so that you don't have to use a monorepo. It's been a bit of a whirlwind tour. The fact that I only got this working properly on Saturday meant that this is kind of showing you the bleeding edge version of it. I'm probably going to be doing a few blog posts, maybe some YouTube videos or something like that over the next while, so follow me on Twitter. But before I go, there's one more thing that I wanted to leave you with. Going back to that tweet I put out on Saturday, I wanted to show you what it looks like to have an Empress app using the bottled Ember, because that's the point of all this. This is where I came from. This is why I wanted it in the first place. And this is a screenshot of like the tree output from my personal blog that I deployed on Saturday. And as you can see, it looks so clean. Like it's just Markdown, it's just images, you know, you've got some tags in there, and there's no Ember app kind of crowding it out. And like the Ember app that was there was very small, but I can't really explain the psychological difference between a small little thing that was surrounding versus having nothing but Markdown in a folder and it runs your Empress blog app. But yeah, definitely makes me feel like this. And that's it. So I will, like I said, I'm going to be putting out some blog posts. I'm also going to be putting out a rival V2 blueprint that actually uses all of these things. So you can just generate it now and use it without having to set it up yourself. And I appreciate if anybody wants to tell me what they think about it, try it out. If you've got an add-on that you were thinking about moving over and you're like me and you don't like monorepos, I really want you to try this. And that's it. See you all later and happy coding.